Well, folks, I'm going to go ahead and get started. This is Greg Williams. Welcome to class. Did everybody have a good week? Yes, no, maybe so. Okay, people are chatting in. Thank you. Good. Glad to hear that. Um, okay, so we're a week into our course, and basically at this point, in terms of assignments, you should have already given me your personal contact info, your bio, and your resume. And please make sure that read the syllabus and choose your assignments. I give you a little menu and you can choose from things. And again, what I want to do is make this class as practical as possible, and that's the main reason I bring speakers in from the outside. So does anybody have any questions on the syllabus? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. I'm always available afterwards or tomorrow or whenever, so you can send me an email. Tonight, we're going to hear from Ciaran Lesikar, and I had a hard time pronouncing Ciaran's name the first time I saw it on a piece of paper, but I'll bet I wasn't the first one ever to butcher your name, Ciaran. Ciaran is a graduate of our program, and now he works at Aerotech, um, and he is a program manager of sales systems. Um, Ciaran, I don't use his name, but I always tell the story of um, Ciaran was thinking about, after 4 or 5 courses in the program, applying for jobs. And he's like, I'm thinking about applying for a job. What do you think? And I said, hey, I think it's a great idea, because he had career as a successful career as a teacher, and he was kind of doing a subtle career change. And I said, yeah, you should go ahead and start applying for jobs. And he ended up getting a job. And I remember he told me he was surprised he got the job. And I said, well, why are you surprised? And he said, well, other people that applied for it already had their masters and had, experience specifically in this field, and I don't. I said, well, why do you think they hired you? He said, they really liked my portfolio. So that's a good example of the work that you do in this program when you do it with real clients is viable, bona fide, genuine work that counts in the real world. And I think that's where our profession is going in terms of hiring and talent management. We're going on demonstrated proficiencies and competencies. So, Ciaran, I always tell that story about you. I don't mention you specifically by name, but I always remember that. So it's great to have you back. I want to introduce Ciaran now. He's going to talk about ensuring project success, and I think many of you probably know, and if you don't, I'm going to share a little information. Normally in our field, people will start out sometimes as an instructional designer, and a typical career progression, career path is to get into management, specifically through project management. So I'm very excited to hear what Ciaran has to say, because I think it's very relevant, and I think that if people want to get ahead in our field, getting management experience is very important, and that's a very typical career path. So Ciaran, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to give you the presenting wand here, and you're going to see a little dialog box. And yes, I believe that you are the presenter now.
Excellent. Thank you, Greg. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So, can you see my screen right now then, I'm assuming? Greg, can you hear my screen? I guess maybe you, are you on mute now?
Yes, I can see the boat. I can see it, definitely.
Right, so that's not my boat. But that's what I want.
Do you wish it was?
That's the boat that reminds me whenever I start getting frustrated with things. That reminds me to stick it out. So, so thank you. Like you said, I started the program just to take maybe just a couple minutes to give a little background. Again, I know I think you sent the bio out to everybody, so I think probably you all had a chance to read that. But I did start my career as a teacher for a long time and coach. And I know we had one person who's doing a similar transition, so that was great to see. And hopefully we'll have time to get to those questions because I definitely have a little bit of insight around making that transition. But I did, as you mentioned, started with I did get a job in 2007, which was pretty much in the middle of me taking the being in the master's program. So I only had a few classes under my belt at the time, but I had enough, to your point, that I had some work samples and whatnot, in addition to a number of things that I brought to the table from my past job experiences. What I started off doing is nope, nope. Somebody has us off.
Sharia, can you mute yourself, please?
Okay, I'm sorry.
Thank you, Sharia. So I was initially hired at Aerotech to redesign their sales training, which, if you know anything about Aerotech, we're a staffing company. We're the largest privately held staffing company in America. And of course, I didn't know that at the time. I had no idea what staffing meant. But we are, primarily, even though we would think it's recruiting, we really still fancy ourselves a sales organization. So I was very fortunate to be able to be brought in right in a subject area that is considered very important. So I spent a couple years really working on the redesign of the sales training, which is really where I had the first opportunity to engage with my stakeholders, to see the pros and cons, and certainly to make a number of mistakes along the way. Interesting is, as you design training, one of the things that you do is you kind of embed yourself in really fully understanding your learners, fully understanding their process. I was fortunate. I had a manager who took me on the road, and we went and visited 35 offices in approximately 60 days. We just traveled around the country, and I was away from home for almost 2 months, coming back every now and then. So it was the best experience I ever had, and certainly one of the things that I learned throughout in getting ready to put out some technology training was I ended up getting to know the tool actually better than the folks who were teaching it to me, which was interesting. It kind of actually what led me to my career path when a position opened up to really head up our sales and understand our process. And one of the things that I will mention, I think, throughout my discussion is that, and I think one of the questions that somebody asked was, what's the difference between, say, an ISD and a senior ISD? And one of the things I think it is really consulting and bringing something to the table. And obviously, we need to be, neutral, and our job is really to listen and to capture what's really going on. But one of the things that we also bring to the table is sometimes a fresh perspective. And so I was able to see a lot of things that maybe folks who had been engaged in the process for a long time hadn't really thought about. So I was able to add value, which I think was really what led to my next position, moving into becoming a business process owner. And as a business process owner, my job was really to translate, just like we would translate into training. My job was really to translate what the best practices were, what's the processes, what are the things we're trying to drive, and how does the technology help to drive that. Then, of course, went hand in hand is the fact that I had a training background. They, of course, looked to me to help to do most of my own training design. It's just when I got promoted to program manager when I was given then more professional development resources to help, and that's really what it is. The bigger projects, they do that, but I'm still responsible for driving our processes, and then more so now engaging with a lot of our executives. So I have had the opportunity to spend more time with a lot of the executives that we really don't get an opportunity to spend near enough time with when we're designing training. So I do come at that with the perspective and understanding the difficulties. I was fortunate enough also to work with 2 other UMBC graduates, and at one point it was just the 3 of us. We've all now moved on to manager level positions at Aerotech, and now I think we have a team of 6 ISDs, I believe. And I don't know, I believe you'll be hearing from one of my counterparts, Jeff Boehm, on a different day. So moving on, enough about kind of what I'm doing right now. What I definitely want to talk about is when Greg asked me, he said, well, think of something that you think would be impactful, and would maybe be of interest to you all. And really one of the very first things that popped into my mind was, what were some of the issues that I felt like caused some projects to be successful or not successful? And it's funny, at first I kept going through all of the X's and O's and the principles and some of the things that I still will hit on, I think, just because I have a soapbox and somebody will listen. But primarily one of the things I noticed was something as simple as just talking to the right people, having the right sponsors, folks who are really going to champion what it is that you're putting out. And then also, and through experience and understanding and having projects that we've implemented that have failed, realizing that some of the reasons was that we did not engage our stakeholders enough, we didn't engage them at the right time. As I'm sure you know, even the act of change management begins on day 1. And it really begins with, who are you talking to? Are you engaging? For example, and it will be a question, answer one of your questions, which is, are we even engaging our learners? Do we have a sample of learners that we're talking about? And I can tell you, we have a sister company, Tech Systems, who's about the same size as us. So I get an opportunity to work a lot with them, and I see them making this mistake still repeatedly, in that they're even more of a top-down company. The way that they run their company, and oftentimes they skip the engaging their learners, and they do still realize a lot of pain from that as we get through the implementation, and then they wonder why, we built this the way we know that they need to be using it, and then they find later that they're not getting the kind of support or adoption that they expected. I do want to say, though, as I go through this, my ADHD will show, because I will bounce around. You probably already realize that at all, so I apologize for that. I also did have these grandiose plans that I was going to have this great PowerPoint presentation, provide some visuals, go back to my ISD times, and that didn't happen. Life, I guess, just got in the way. And I'm trying to follow here. Let me just see 1 second. Let me just make sure I didn't just look up and miss. Okay, got it. I'm trying to follow this chat as well. Yeah, and Tracy, I'll hopefully we'll touch on that and definitely ask again as we get through some of this. First thing I think that, and it's first thing for a reason, which is I think one of the most important things that we realized was that you really need an executive sponsor. And what I mean by executive sponsor, and that could vary by when you say executive, depending on the size of the company and the size of the audience that's being impacted, that really would determine how high up in the organization that you need somebody to really champion your project. Oftentimes we don't have that luxury, but especially for very large projects, large initiatives, such as in this case, one thing that I will refer a lot to is our Salesforce implementation. So we changed our entire sales technology from what was called Siebel, so it's a customer relationship management tool, that has to align, and we spent about a year putting it together after 6 months of piloting, and then we did another 3 months of piloting. So that's certainly the largest project that I have been involved in. We have roughly roughly 3,000 users, so of many, many different job roles. And that, of course, we did have an executive sponsor and was very successful. So when I refer to executive sponsor, that's kind of what I'm speaking to. What I do want to start, and one of the things I do know from having done a lot of webinars is that I want to make sure that we engage you at least a little bit, let you participate. So I have a few stop points just to get some quick feedback from you all, or involvement. So first thing I'll ask is just to get a gauge of where you all are. Why do you think an executive sponsor is important? And if you can just respond via chat, that would be great. Yeah, and I think as Greg did, make sure you select you can go ahead and share that with everybody. Why do you think it's important to have an executive sponsor? To know the highest level business unit goals, so it's a strategic alignment, absolutely. Right, overall ownership of the business process, ensure the project won't be derailed. Yep, sponsor can help get the rest of the team on board, absolutely. Especially, and you'll hear me say it again and again, dealing with distractors or resistors. To be able to share the goals and needs of the organization. Yep, and I'll address that when we talk a little bit more about the change management. And it absolutely sends a great sign as far as the commitment of the organization. Couldn't agree more. And then, again, really aligning with the long-term direction of the company. All excellent answers. So I don't need to, what do we say, I don't need to sell what's been sold. So obviously, sounds like I like where all of you all are going. Good, and I like the example. So we have one, which is they had a major command support, which is obviously critical, especially depending on the size of the change. But also, I think it's a great point, which I'll touch on again, which is that you had SMEs that were best performers, and it certainly is also critical for many of the same reasons. Great, thank you. So I think that one of the other things I would add to that, and I will certainly talk about this from a training design, is that if you have a true business problem that you're trying to solve, you shouldn't have a problem finding an executive sponsor. If you have trouble finding an executive sponsor, I would question the value and importance of your project to the organization. So that, to me, and along with a lot of the other things that you all said, there are certainly some times where your sponsor may be professional development. It may be that they're brought in for, to help to build something small. But again, I think even the folks who head up our leaders of our professional development recognize that even when they're putting together and agreeing to do projects, they will also make sure that we have some sort of an executive sponsor. And I will cover a specific example that we have where that did not happen, and quite honestly is still not happening with one of our courses. So next thing I have is getting agreement around the access needed for your SMEs or executives. So having a sponsor is great, identifying especially your top performers, some of your other sponsors or key stakeholders, such as representative samples of your supervisors, who are also going to be critical. Getting access to these folks is going to be critical, and getting agreement as to having access is also going to be critical. And I know I could read from a lot of the questions that were submitted, that seems to be a common issue, which is that, yeah, you know, you get, we'll let you talk to them, but then when push comes to shove, everyone's too busy. So the first step is obviously to how do you identify all of your key stakeholders and your subject matter experts. And I'm actually going to go over a model that I've used or a process that I've used to help to do that. So that's obviously important to first identify who they are. Building your project plan, including your SMEs time and scheduling those SMEs, I think is critical. Also building in your validation points with your sponsors, as well as some of your other stakeholders, and then obviously building in numerous milestones and touch points. Oftentimes I think we neglect to say, okay, you know what, we are at a certain point and we're not going to be able to continue to proceed without, without agreement that we are on the right path. I can tell you from my experience that I have gone way down a path multiple times, only to be brought back in some cases, or at least 2 cases that I can think of, back to the very beginning. And I will say that both of these were situations where we did not have a clear executive sponsor. And when we did finally engage them, we realized that we were not on point. So it's very frustrating, obviously, when you do that, when you're in a position where you want to work extra hours and really knock one out of the park, and then only to find out that you just threw away 2 weekends because you got the wrong direction. I will also direct you to a book that I really, and actually a book that I read as part of a class, the consulting class, that I found absolutely extremely valuable, which was the Block Flawless Consulting book. And in that book, Block talks a lot about, holding those alignment meetings and really making sure that you have an agreement and a contract with, whether it's an internal client or an external client, that this is what is expected. And in order for you to be successful, you need X amount of time from these people. And that's really critical. I think somehow people think that we can just, talk to you for a little bit, we'll go away, and then come back, and we're just going to hit it on the mark. And it's just impossible. Now, granted, the longer you're with a particular company, I think the less of that you have to do. I think you can speed up some of the processes because you already know your audience well. You already know a lot of the players involved, the processes, et cetera. But at the end of the day, even internally, we have to have that. So that, again, I would direct you to that Flawless Consulting, where he really talks about that, and it's been around for a long, long time, but I think it's extremely applicable still. Next thing, where I think where your stakeholders can really be critical is helping you to clearly understand the business problem. Again, if you don't understand the business problem, and unfortunately too many times, especially as an entry-level ISD, you're expected just to be a pair of hands, and literally, and again, I think that actually is a term from Block's book. You're expected just to be a pair of hands. Here, build this training, show our learners how to do this. And that's what happened to me as well. And we had lots of pushback where we said, hey, I need to know more. And I really need to, in order for me to really do a good job, I need to know more. One of my mantras has always been to give them what they want, but more importantly, give them what they need. And sometimes what they need is not what they came to you for wanting, or initially, saying that they wanted. And the only way to really identify what they need is you need to back them up, right? My strategy has been to play dumb a little bit and to say, all right, well, you know, back up a little bit. Can you explain to me again what is it that they need to do? You know, and then as you go through your analysis, you know, and I'll cover a little bit more of that as well. But if you don't understand what that business problem is that they're trying to solve, if you don't understand what the expectation is from a behavior and beyond the behavior, really, what is the business outcomes? It's going to be very easy to miss the mark. You may deliver that. You may create the best training in the world, but you may be creating that training all over again in a year when they come back and they say, you know what, we're not seeing the results that we expected. Again, we deal with a lot of smart people, a lot of people who understand probably their business or the process that they think is the best, but sometimes a little perspective through analysis can help. Obviously, speaking to analysis, we all know, or any of us who have worked already as an ISD, understand that the analysis and the evaluation are most commonly cut. And it's unfortunate because they are, I think, the two most critical pieces. They actually will help to feed the rest and are critical, especially in the analysis, to feed the rest. And we're talking about stakeholders and the importance of those stakeholders. And if you don't have time to do your analysis, how do you identify the correct stakeholders to be involved? How do you identify the correct people to help drive that change and to ensure from, let's say, a level 3 evaluation or level 4, ensure that what's being taught is being implemented and being applied. So again, only thing I can say about that is that we just need to continue to keep fighting the good fight. There are times where I did commit my own weekends because I wasn't given the work time to do that because I didn't want to waste my time. And it was really after a couple of these projects went south that I said, you know what, I don't really care. I'm going to commit my own personal time to do some more analysis because in the end of the day, that's going to be what makes my work and my end product look good. The other thing to look at is, again, as understanding the longer you're within an organization, it helps is knowing what's been successful in the past or what has not, and understanding why. So as you're starting in a new place, really asking a lot of questions and understanding, because every place is, you know, there is not a one-size-fits-all. So understanding your organization, your audience, and what has been successful, I think, is really critical. One of the ways in which I do that, and I'm going to really go away from my topic for a moment a little bit, not completely, because I do want to share something, and it is something that that myself and two of my classmates put together. It's just a model that helps us to really crystallize our understanding of a process and how to apply it. And I often, you will even pull this out and speak to my stakeholders about it to try to help to make the case as to why it is that we would like more time for analysis and why we need to engage our stakeholders. I'm going to pull it up real quick. I'm going to give you the 2-minute overview. I have spoken to, in fact, my classmate who I worked on this with is now teaching one of the classes for the human performance class. And I don't know, Greg, I can't remember what the name of the class was, but I know that we presented this in her class last semester. But all we did, and it's a model. We're not selling it. It was a way. We actually did not create this for any purpose other than to help ourselves to understand how to apply. And we call it SPATI. And what it really is was taking some of the principles from ISPI and performance improvement, taking a step back and asking some of those bigger questions, more strategic questions, and helping us to really apply the ADDIE model, but making sure that we're also including some of the really critical parts around understanding business problems and understanding, thank you, yes, Catherine Ciaran is her name. And understanding, you know, really what is the end game for the business. So it really starts with the systems analysis, and this is really the only real place where we take a step back, and you do really more of a systems analysis. And there's a lot of great courses out there and books around how to do that. But one of the things is really understanding is that even if I'm given a very small behavior to teach, and maybe it's just teach cold calling, I need to understand, where does cold calling fit in the system? Like, where does it fit within their process? Where does it fit? Who's feeding those leads to them? Is there a problem in cold calling, or is it a problem in where they're starting? I don't know until I really look at where it fits within the entire system. Really understanding that if you make a change, understanding and identifying kind of the plus and minus on each of those changes. Does it add to the system? Does it take away? Does it add to my part of the system as a learner, but then take away from somebody else's? So in some cases, you could, again, you talking about giving somebody what they need and not just what they want. That may help that particular learner, but it may negatively impact the system, because now somebody else has to pick up some parts or start doing something that they weren't previously doing. And in some cases, there's maybe more highly compensated people. So again, understanding that and understanding some of the constraints, I think will, again, help you to hit the mark. The rest of this pretty much aligns with ADDIE performance assessment, doing a performance gap analysis, your design. Again, throughout all these phases, we need to involve our stakeholders to make sure that we are all in agreement. And also, again, how do we leverage our partnering and collaboration with them? This is really critical. When you involve your stakeholders in the design, then you are far more likely to have champions in the end. Develop and test. Now, what we did, we added this test part because, again, I think it's really critical that whatever it is that you're doing, and you'll hear me say throughout the rest of the night, pilot, pilot, pilot. If you get disagreements among SMEs, pilot it. If you're not sure whether it's going to work, pilot it. Even if you think you're sure, pilot it. Always roll out to a smaller audience. Always, make sure that that is integrated as part of your development process. Implement. So systematically deploy the solution, and then again, manage the change. Make sure that you're measuring, see that you're getting the positive results, not just seeing the behaviors. Evaluate and enhance. So in this case, again, one of the things is building this enhancement into your process. So when we talk about an alignment agreement, right, a training, whether it be any kind of training, and I hope that your training solutions are a combination of non-training and training, including change management, including reinforcement, including evaluation. But at the end of the day, if you build those into the evaluation into your process, and you get agreement to that, and then you understand that we have to go back and review this. It's very, very unlikely that you're going to roll something out that is just perfect. And it's very unlikely that that target is not a moving one. So you have it built correct, you think you have it down. At the end of the day, you may be dead on, but guess what? The world's not going to stop moving. So, very soon your subject matter may change, the process may change, your performers may be changing. So making sure that there's an agreement that that's built in, that you have that, and again, that's why you see this model as being more of a cycle than being a straight line. So that's 5 minutes around SPATI. It's one model that we use. Again, we built that just to help ourselves. One of the things I will say, since I'm talking about models, I think that a lot of folks that we've spoken to as we presented this kind of feel intimidated by this and by a model. And there's none of you that can't create your own model. To me, all a model is a conceptual way to internalize what you know to be true, what you're trying to stick to. I think that a lot of folks, the big mistake folks make is they will come into a new situation and not be flexible enough or creative enough to say, you know what, I can take the principles of what I know and apply those to this situation. And again, no situation is different. So this was just an example of how we did that. And it is something that I do use sometimes with stakeholders to explain to them why it is that we need their involvement. So next question for you is, for those of you who have had experience in doing this, are you being allowed to ask why? So I've come to you, and I mentioned that oftentimes somebody will come to us, usually a very smart person, will come to us with a training solution already baked out. They know that their salespeople need to do a better job of cold calling, and that's what they want. They want this model, this cold calling model taught to their folks, and that's going to fix all of their problems. Are you allowed to ask why? First question. How many of you through chat, or if you're not, what kind of resistance are you facing? Okay, good. So one says yes, and then of course, we have the government has a determined solution already, and then that's bid out. Okay. My wife works for Booz Allen, so she's often the bidder. Then a lot of support with open minds. That's great. And as we see, maybe a few more answers. In my current projects, not a lot of resistance. Great. I can tell you that when I started, we had a lot of resistance. And I do think over time that has, I can tell you over time that has changed a lot. The department heads usually want to direct everything. So we have another one who says yes, but again, the ultimate decisions and kind of directing that pushback. And that's not uncommon. I think when we say ask, there are times where I know I have to ask through somebody else. And then the resistance coming from the end user is good. And hopefully we'll address some of the change management stuff that might help with that. Yes, that's great. I love it. The 771 project, you asked why a lot, and they're like, wait a second, you gotta know your place, And I will tell you that with one of the questions, again, one of the answers to one of the questions was what was one of the changes, things that I expected or surprised me. Really what I still have trouble adjusting to is hierarchy and understanding that I actually have to get somebody else involved to ask that question. And that's frustrating, but at the end of the day, as long as I get the answer, I'm happy. So, good. I think the other thing that helps is obviously the next, taking that to the next level is not having to ask why, but really asking to be engaged at the right time. So when some of those strategic discussions are occurring, I think most of us who have designed any kind of training or solutions or performance solutions know that the more we're able to hear about the quality, what the quality is behind the strategic discussions, and more we can hear the back and forth, the better we can help to hit the mark. So getting a seat at that table, and I can tell you for sure that when I have an opportunity to really hear those strategic discussions, I know that I can deliver something that's far better than when I'm just being kind of told the output from those. One of the ways I do push back on that again is to kind of say, look, if I can more clearly understand the ultimate objectives, I can ensure that we're emphasizing that in the training, and then oftentimes again that will get me out there on the table at one point. So I do want to bring up a specific example now, and it's one really that fell short partly, it is still alive. It's still a class that we offer. It's funny, we've known all along, I think, well, I don't know that they've known all along. I think they know now why it has always struggled. but it is still a class. It's called the Recruiter 2 class. So it's an advanced recruiter class that we offer, and it gets revamped every year or two. And you could say, well, that's great, it's updating because, our needs are constantly changing and we're changing with the times, and, and unfortunately that's not really the case. The first few times it was updated because we didn't have an executive sponsor, partially, and we still don't truly have an executive sponsor for this. But the biggest reason why it is constantly changing is that we don't have a business problem that we're trying to solve. We have recruiters, and again, I say that, but that's not entirely true. The only true business problem that we can point to is attrition, which I just don't think. I think personally, but you're going to hear my personal opinion, is that there's better ways to address attrition. But I think what what folks feel is that we have recruiters, and a typical career path is to move from recruiter to sales. But not all recruiters want to sell. So at a certain point, they get to be pretty good at recruiting, and so we kind of said to ourselves, well, we've got to offer them something more. So let's create a Recruiter 2 class. That's the next thing that's going to help them. But that content is constantly changing. And what concerns me is we actually right now have a Recruiter 3 class in development. And I have spoken to my colleague, Jeffrey, about this, and I think he had some concerns about it as well, because, again, this did not come from a business problem. So, again, I think it points to, and through my experience, is that, it doesn't mean the class won't, it doesn't mean that class isn't exciting people, because it is, because the people who leave that class are fired up and they're excited to go back and recruit. But the problem is they're not recruiting any better than they did before. But we did make them excited. And so, that's great. But if I was a bottom line business person and I'm taking them out of production for a week and paying for their travel expenses and trainers and everything else, we also have not even seen when you start to talk about evaluation, we actually haven't even seen a reduction in attrition in the recruiters who came through that class. But the assumption is that we would, and it was 4 years before somebody actually decided to look and see, was attrition actually going down. Again, testing, validating, understanding what are those business objectives that you're trying to face are going to truly help you in the long run. Last thing I would also say, and I don't even know if it's related around understanding the business problem, but I will say one of my lessons learned is to always consider all solutions. So as you're talking about giving somebody what they need, they came to you for training, and I'm sure, and I'm guessing you've probably heard this from other folks. They came to you for a training solution. So oftentimes we give them a training solution. But unfortunately, and this is, again, one of the other questions I think somebody asked me was kind of how is technology kind of impacting things in businesses. And one of the things that I see is that it allows us to deliver more and more effective non-training solutions. And in training solutions, I mean really training. And there's, you could say a job aid is a training solution or not. You could argue over that. But there are certainly a lot of other solutions that you can give that may be more important. And in quite often we find in performance improvement world is that the number one problem with people not doing what they're asked to do is that their expectations are not clear. And that's not a training solution in as much as it could just be a communication issue or a reporting issue or a feedback issue. So when I talk about non-training solutions, I want to make sure that everybody kind of understands what I'm referring to. So maybe just to share, and I know that a lot of you do, but in case there are some on this call that don't, can we get some of you to maybe contribute? What are some common non-training solutions that you've used that you believe are successful or that have been used with you? job aid. I probably create a job aid every day almost. Streamline process. Good. I like that. That's right. The looking at your technology and business rules within your technology to drive behavior change. Documented procedures. Yep. Good. And again, I'd go back to clearly communicating. 70% of all performance improvement problems are caused solely by a lack of clearly communicated expectations. Let's see. Try to support more social media use and open collaboration. Okay. And that's opening up a whole new level of kind of support out there that we haven't had in the past. Good. Communicate. Really, you say time to meet, but I think we're really talking a lot about, we're talking about communication, right? Opportunities to share best practices. And we're talking about informal learning, which I'm sure you've covered a lot within the program, and really how impactful that is. Restructuring information, good. I mean, some of these seem like such simple solutions, but the reality is that is exactly what's needed sometimes. Is you go in and you go, let me put myself in your shoes, or let me talk to some of our end users and say, what are you seeing? What do you think the problem is? Well, I just don't understand, and that's good stuff. Okay, so again, value of engaging your stakeholders, helping you to better understand the expected metrics to determine success, not only for the project, but also, again, for your specific employees. To use kind of Kirkpatrick, level 2, what do they need to know? What do they need to be able to do? That's usually that's usually something that we can get to pretty quickly. Now again, is what we're asking them to do and we're ensuring that they can do, is that can actually ensure that we've met their business or solved their business problem? Well, depends on what kind of analysis they let you have, right, or let you conduct. We'll find out if they let you do a level 3. And are they letting you really, and that's, again, getting that buy-in and getting the commitment to going back to your learners and building in, making sure that they are doing what it is that you taught them to do or are expecting them to do. That's critical. I know I'm very fortunate, very, very fortunate that really living in the world of technology now, I have a lot more access to out-of-the-box reporting capabilities. So I can see if we've asked them to do X, I can create reports in Salesforce that show me that they've added the role of the contact that they just called. I can see that they've added quality notes. I mean, there's great things that I can see, and there's a lot of things you can start to leverage as you look to your technology. If you're dealing with a lot of technology that, if you ask, that you may be able to get at. But certainly it's going to be critical to get buy-in, because if you don't have access to that, you're going to need to engage your supervisors, right? And you're going to need to engage other folks, or you pull people out of production. So again, that becomes more of an investment. So what is the value in that? And then finally, kind of what level 4 and understanding what was that business impact. Did you get the business impact that, as an objective, and how have they done after 3 months, 6 months, 1 year, and how will you know that they've met that? Do you have that metric built in? So again, going back to level 3, level 4, some of these things, again, I'd like to understand, make sure that we're all talking about the same types of things, to understand how our stakeholders can assist us in driving that. What are some examples of kind of level 3 or level 4 measures that you all have used in the past? Had buy-in in the level 2 recruiters class. So I didn't build that. That was actually a level. The recruiter 2 class was built, and it's actually managed by other people. But no, they didn't have that at all. In fact, when I started there, we didn't do much of that at all. So not have the opportunity. Another person, not Patrick, not have the opportunity. Let's see if I skipped any. So we had a question about the Recruiter 2 class and whether that was the problem. And yeah, I would say absolutely. That was a problem, and as well as the fact that we didn't really have any metrics. A lot of what was being taught was not measurable, although I think they are slowly moving in that direction. So it sounds like we haven't had, maybe give it another few seconds to see if anybody does have experience with more level 3 and level 4, so understanding kind of what, as long as I'm not sure everyone fully understands what I'm referring to. So in level 3, we're talking about where they, how do we evaluate that they've been able to apply it over time? And then level 4 really is it having the business impact? So at Girl Scouts we implemented a survey, okay, and then, okay, good. So a post-training survey, good. And this is behavioral attitude again. So it can be taken with a grain of salt. It is kind of self-reporting. Did they do this? Or even from a supervisor, did they do this? Which is great. I mean, it's better than nothing when you don't have. And then testing through observation, very good. That's exactly right. So when you don't have metrics that you can build in, going back. And again, you've got your behavioral attitude change testing, which is maybe at the low end of the reliability scale, 360 evaluations, and I think that for sure is that you're getting at a much higher end, especially leadership training, because it's partly what you're teaching in that leadership is something that can be measured from your from the folks who report to them. Do we mean now testing through observation certainly is one where I think you can then conduct an extant data analysis, and I actually have in my notes, even applying scientific methodology and how do you do an appropriate level of sampling. That's really where I think I was able to apply my teaching background and having taught math and science, special ed, but we still did teach kind of scientific methodology, so that has helped in that. In fact, and the fact that my wife is an epidemiologist, I did go to her and has asked for some study design help. Admin evaluations, good. Standardized testing, huge gains. Yep, I agree. Nothing more than a smile sheet. Yeah, well, that's, I think, the norm, not the exception. In a sales environment, I assume you would be able to generate reports from CRM tool. Absolutely. In fact, I'll show you a quick example of that since you brought it up. And then 90-day evaluations, good. And again, if you're going to do, a lot of it's dependent on what you're teaching. If it's very much more knowledge-based as opposed to application-based, then absolutely that even makes more sense, right? Coming back and say, okay, you remember that policy we taught you? Let's see if you remember it now. Good stuff. So before I pop into Salesforce for one moment, only thing that I'm going to add to this, and I have surveys, point-in-time evaluations, business reports. So again, one of the things that sometimes people may not realize is that you may have data that you're not aware of. There may be some data that you're not aware of, and it's really good when you should hopefully find that out when you're going through the initial systems analysis. It's understanding what are we measuring, what can we measure. Maybe no one's currently collecting that information, but someplace, some system has that. So again, I think dig in deep and try to find out what you may be able to access. And I have one answer before I move on. I'm not certain in my experience that most people would know what to do with evaluations or lack of confidence to act. And I would agree. And I think the other problem with data today, and one of the things that we deal with constantly, is really data integrity. So we do have to be careful in not overreacting, because we have to understand that there is, in some cases, limited reliability as to what that data is. And along that same lines, the last thing I wanted to say about this, about the metrics piece, is when we're using and seeking feedback, whether that be a survey feedback from individual users or even from managers, I have, in my experience, found that we cannot assume that they are correct. There are some situations where, yeah, absolutely, but I can tell you that there are a lot of times when we went to our supervisors, the managers of our offices, and said, hey, we taught your folks to do X. Are they doing it? Yeah, absolutely. I totally believe they're doing it. And then, because I have access to better data, I can come back and say, you know what, not only are they not doing it, they haven't done it in 3 months. So again, depending in knowing your situation, but I think it's important that we try to, as much as we can, move beyond that, and really try to get more evidence if we can. So I'm going to show you, just for fun, a dashboard that I have created and maybe make you jealous, because I do have access to such great evaluation tools. This is actually a DBO's dashboard. So our DBOs are our office managers. We actually also do have a similar view of individual performers. So I can actually see how I measure in all of these metrics for myself. So just like a regular dashboard on your car, how fast am I going, how's my oil, et cetera, et cetera. If we've chosen to drive a certain thing strategically and we've provided training, we'll add a component to their dashboard to say, hey, out of this training, you committed to conducting, 20 or more calls per week. All right, well, here is a metric right here, and so I can see how I'm tracking towards that, which Ed Musio, who I don't know if you're familiar with him, does a lot of great stuff around talking about performance and really providing people a visibility into how they are tracking towards what their expectations are. I think one of the analogies he uses is, would you ever try to drive your car without being able to see out of your windshield, but only using your rearview mirror? And unfortunately, I think in businesses today, oftentimes we are asking our folks to do that. We're giving them we're telling them what they did, but it's a month ago. It's what they did 2 weeks ago. But how does that drive what I'm going to do today? Because it doesn't. And so giving people that visibility and that evaluation, again, it's not just training validation. It's really helping folks to track them towards that particular behavior. So again, this is, and I actually can, I've built all of these, but I can actually even drill down into these reports, and I can actually see the notes for the meetings that they had. I can see whether it was a first visit or not, if that's what we're trying to go after. I can see if this call was for business development or was it a maintenance particular call. So again, this is just one example of, and when we started this, I will tell you that this was not very accurate. But again, you heard the phrase, what gets measured gets done. And in some cases, especially in sales, that is exactly correct. And this actually helps the DBOs and the managers, supervisors to be more engaged, to say, hey, you know what, did Anna make the phone calls that she said she was going to make? Well, they don't have to say yes because they saw her on the phone. They can come here and they go, well, no, actually, she didn't. And if she did, I want to know what she was talking about. So probably enough of that. Any questions about that? Does that make everyone good with I was going to open up questions really about measurement, see if anybody had anything. Excellent. And I love the teacher example, too, about being able to get information. And I will tell you the best thing that happened to teaching as a parent is the Parent Connect and the online grading systems. And as a special ed teacher, that I would have loved that. When I was charged with having to help drive performance for my special ed students, I would never get a clear answer. And if any of you all are parents, in the past, I know, and I still get a no. Did you do your homework? Oh, yeah, I don't got any more homework. I did it all. Well, guess what? I can open it. Now I can go in the school systems. I can go into the system, and I can see what they have or haven't done. It's phenomenal. There's no more excuses for parents, and certainly as a special ed teacher, that would have helped me. And certainly no more excuses for kids. And in this case, translate that to performers as well in the work environment. Yeah, and I love that. There's no, and I think that we're talking about the educational experience or a situation, but we say, they're informed, right? So there's no surprises, right? And that's what we always say. If you have the right performance system in place, when I go to the end of the year for my end of the year evaluation, I'm not nervous, or maybe I am, but because I know I should be. There should be no surprises at an evaluation or a meeting with your supervisor. And I would agree, looking at some of your, yep, good, the APIs now, and again, starting to look at what we have available to us through technology is tremendous. Yeah, I agree. It's hard to enter that information, and that is the other side, right? Is actually having to document that, and the problem is not with the expectation. The problem is that you have 200 kids. Excellent. All right, we're going to keep moving on. I think that communication. So one of the things we talk about, the importance of communicating consistently throughout the project is critical. And one of the things to make sure that we don't, kind of shortcut on is having a communication plan in place. One of the things that I didn't used to do that I do now is we do now engage different departments to do what they do best. So we have it. We're fortunate. We're large enough. We have an internal communications team. We have people who really specialize on communication. Now, I know enough about communication to be dangerous. Certainly, I learned enough about how to communicate to people and through training design and what I've learned about that. But creating a communication plan, knowing who you have to communicate to, how many touch points are you going to have throughout the project. And I don't mean just, again, I don't mean just with your stakeholders, although that is certainly critical, but engaging with your stakeholders and understanding right away that, some of your change management has to start to occur. And I'm going to show you an example of a plan that I've put together that touches on part of the communication, and it's one of an earlier, it's earlier in the process. But many of your touch points need to occur early. They need to occur before you're done with your project. They need to occur, and they need to be delivered by a number of your stakeholders. There are messages that need to be delivered maybe months ahead of time. Again, depending on the size of your change, depending on the size of the training being implemented in the audience. There may be times where you need to engage 3 months prior. Hey, folks, there's a change coming, and I'm going to address the types of things that need to be communicated. But that may need to come down 3 months ahead of time from the president, from the vice president. Then, a month before, sit down and you need to have conversations with your supervisors. The supervisors sitting down and starting to, again, set your folks up for your learning, set them up for the change. Many touch points, many modes. And then the other thing is really understanding how you cascade communication through your leadership chain. And that's exactly right, Larry. You need to sell the change. And it's not really us that's selling the change, right? You're actually going to be helping your sponsors sell that change. And then you need to help the supervisors need to sell the change. And the supervisors can't sell the change if they didn't buy the change. So handling those resistors early, and identifying them early is critical. Aligning with your key stakeholders, also extremely critical. One of the things that, and it's funny, you probably heard me keep talking about change management, and we're like, well, you know, this is, you know, ISD, and we're about training design. Well, and I think that's one of the things that I learned pretty quickly when, and really solidified just within the last probably year and a half, is that in my belief is that all training is change. And training is a component of how you change, of how you drive some sort of change, but almost every training is change, and it represents change either to what they used to do, or, and we don't overlook that you may be training new folks to do something that you believe other folks are doing, but they're not. So you're still having to sell that change because they're going to go back to their work environment, they're going to go back to their peers, and one of the things that one of our vice presidents talks a lot about is practical drift, and it's prevalent, it's everywhere. So there's a way in which we expected a job to be done. We expect that it's continuing to be done that way, but over time, we start to drift away from that. So when you send new learners back to do the job, someone's going to say, hey, you know what, that's not the way I do it. This is a lot faster to do it this way. Well, and then the next person says, you know, who showed that, well, Johnny showed me that when I started. Well, what they don't maybe realize is there's a reason why we don't do it that way, right? So, again, driving that change is critical. There's and really looking at it as change management. There's a lot of books and models about change management. I am going to share one model that I had training in and was certified in, and so again, I would make a recommendation on this book. And you can get the book. There's also training on it, but again, you actually would recognize this because I think a lot of it will sound familiar because it does align with a lot of ISD core objectives for training design, including really a lot of an overlooked component of priming your learners to make that learning sticky. Something, again, that trainers sometimes, especially if you're doing training with subject matter experts, and we do that a lot. We do utilize subject matter experts and top performers to implement, and I think they're very often times they will overlook taking the time to really prime your learners. Understanding, and I'm actually going to pull this over for a second, just to get my computer to work. I'm just going to show you my notes here. ADKAR represents ADKAR. Actually, I like to put a little B there so I get my A's mixed up. A is awareness. Why is the change necessary? Most times, you know, why are we saying this? Why is it necessary to the business, to the company? Why is it necessary for your department? You know, what's going on? What was wrong with the way you did it before? Or why is it that we're asking you to do it in a certain way? And if Johnny, when you go back to your office, says, hey, you know what, we do it this way, well, why don't we do it that way? Right? Why is it necessary to change? And then the other thing, which again, I think these two especially, you will really recognize in training design, which is the desire. So what is in it for your learners? What is in it? Why should they change? So if you're not familiar with the sales term of WIFM, what's in it for me? And just again, awareness is best delivered from supervisors or from leadership. Desire is best delivered from peers and from yourself. So again, identifying what is the reason, why is it, and as we know about adult learners, right, adult learners really need to know why should they do something, or especially why should they do something different from what they've been doing, and really what's the value to me. Again, critical components, and this starts, awareness and desire starts with communication, and certainly is critical knowledge we know about already. This is really right in our sweet spot, in our wheelhouse. Ability, one of the things I did throw down here, again, because I have a soapbox. By ability, we mean skills. I will tell you that I am a huge fan of Gagne's and the levels of application. I feel very strongly that too much of our training, we don't have the opportunity to get them to apply in as much as we can. We expect that they took the test and they know what they're supposed to do, and so they'll be able to do it. And again, I think too many times, and that's where when we start to bring in evaluation, it's really critical to see that they actually do it. Don't just evaluate, that they know what they're supposed to do. And then finally, reinforcement, training, transfer, and evaluation. And again, this is covered a lot in the ADCAR book. So to give you one thing, I'm actually going to pull up one document. And again, I mentioned before about not being afraid to just kind of, do things in your own way, and kind of, I organize information in a certain way that helps me. So I like to do a lot of pre-designed documents. Then I will take those, and I think this answers to another question that someone asked. I take those and I'll put them in different formats depending on who my audience is. So this format, I would not share this table with my executive sponsor. I would not share this. This is too much detail for an executive sponsor, especially the size of this project and the level of the company which the sponsor was in. Oh, ADCAR. We had somebody ask about it. It's A-D-K-A-R. In fact, I'll type it into, and if you do a search, you'll find that pretty quickly. Oops, sorry. I sent that to Greg and not to everybody. All right, I'm not getting this. Are you guys seeing that? Got it, thank you. All right, cool. So kind of coming back to this document that I have here, what I did was we identified and we identified our audience, and then for each audience identified the objectives, high-level objectives, what they should be able to do, and then kind of how we would deliver that message, and then what the timing was. So again, I broke this down into how are we going to build knowledge and ability, how are we going to build awareness and desire, because these were the audience that we needed to build awareness and desire around. Account managers, again, who was going to be involved. So there's places here where, for corporate, for example, we needed a communication sent down from our executive sponsor. When was that going to happen? 4 weeks prior, etc. So this is a high-level example, and then from here we would build out, and when we get agreement at this level, then we would start to build out all of the details around that. And then, again, we hadn't identified some of the follow-up and reinforcement stuff that we needed, so just called that out. And then I called out some of the considerations and some of the other folks who were involved, some of the key stakeholders and what their involvement should be. All right. So last question, or I should say, we'll just tell you, last question for you is what would be the role that the stakeholders should play in your project? So what specifically would you be looking for from your different stakeholders? So maybe, who's the stakeholder and what do you really need from them? Again, just to make sure that we're all on the same page, and maybe some of us haven't thought about some things. Okay, so we have provide expertise. Excellent. Talk a little bit about that with the executive sponsor, but certainly our subject matter experts, our top performers. Good. Okay, openness. Good. Define what their expectations may be for the project. Absolutely. Participation, especially around the change management. Yep. Good. Participation and expectations. One of the things that we are, here we go, good. A little delay here. Now I got to back us up here. Okay. See the business unit with a broad scope so that nothing is missed. Very good. That's exactly right. We need to make sure that we are considering all of the viewpoints. One of the things I mentioned about was doing a system analysis, and if you take kind of real advanced performance improvement courses to kind of show you how to do a full system mapping, but you need to talk to some of these other departments and say, hey, you know what? If we roll this change out, is there going to be a negative impact on your group? Share the input of reality. Yes, I mean, especially engaging your learners and the folks who are actually going to be there, really needing to do a reality check and say, okay, well, I hear that this is going to be work great for you, but and if for nothing else in having that conversation, you identify the places of resistance. Sharing knowledge concerning how this will benefit the organization as a whole. Yeah, critical, especially when you're trying to communicate the awareness and especially the awareness and understanding why are we asking you to do this, right? Most of us, if our company comes to us and says, hey, you know what, I need you to do this differently because we're not making money and I don't want to have to make cuts, right? How many of us are like, oh, okay, why didn't you just say that in the first place? Some cases we still have people who need to know, okay, but yeah, the company, big business, what about me? So we'll get them too. Sharing knowledge concerning how this will benefit the organization as a whole. Already read that, sorry. An advocate for the change. Yeah, that's one of the things on my list really was champion the change. Someone needs to really champion this. And say, hey, look at me. I am behind this. You look up to me. I'm a mentor. I'm a role model. Whoever it is, I am definitely behind this. I see that this is important for us, and especially when you can get your top performers and the folks who are the ones that that are really your leaders. And good timing, Larry. Leading by example. Exactly right. And then I think a couple other things, playing an integral part in the change management, obviously reinforcing and evaluation. So a lot of your supervisors are really going to be responsible to be the ones to not only help to communicate that message, to sit and have that conversation around the desire. Like, why should you be doing this? Why should you be cold calling the way that we have taught you? Well, let's talk about this. You want to make whatever money next year, or and everyone's not driven by money necessarily. There are other folks who are driven by advancement. Well, here, you really need to be, in order to move up to a manager position, you need to be able to teach this. So whatever it is, and identifying what is that with them that drives people, and everyone's drivers are different. And your supervisors, your stakeholders really need to be able to help to give you that information. And then finally, I think to manage that resistance. So sitting down with folks and identifying your resistors and saying, okay, what seems to be the problem? Or I did a level 3 and I'm seeing, hey, what's going on with this? We need to get to the bottom of why it is you're not able to do this, or you don't want to do this. And again, that needs to be fed back to, if it's just a pure training design, that information, it needs to be an open line of communication, so that information gets back to you as a designer of that training, so that hey, wait a second, you know what? Let's head this off in the training or in our communication. And I said before, pilot. I mean, you should be getting this initially straight from your pilot groups. You're going to pilot it once, you're going to pilot it twice, you're going to pilot it 3 times if you can or more, and you're going to get that. You're going to make some tweaks to it. You're going to send it back out and say, hey, did we cut down on our resistors? And that's really going to be critical to get those stakeholders involved, to get that accurate information back. I am going to stop here. I have some other things I wanted to address, but you all have asked tremendous questions. I have a number of really tremendous questions I'd love to get to. But before I do move on, I will open it up for any questions that you may have before I get to the written questions that were submitted. Okay, great. And again, maybe some of the questions that you would have are going to have been submitted, and we might get to them. So some of the projects. So again, a number of projects that I did that were in my portfolio. Again, I did as part of my classes. I did some projects for Habitat for Humanity. We did some other basic trainings. I also had some as a teacher. I was involved in doing teacher training and teacher development. So I think a number of those projects that I put together, and I even included some things that I did, larger programs that I designed as a teacher. Because again, learning is learning, and in this case, again, you can show clear understanding of how to put together a program and design. I'd have to go back and look to see if I can't remember some of the other projects that I did. I do remember one was actually a class, I think, Greg, that you audited or took with me, which was, and we worked on that together, which was the learning communication class, and I did include that visual, which they really liked. So, and I think that was one actually, Greg, that we worked together on.
Correct. We did. I remember there was a project with that pagoda tower in the park in Baltimore City.
Yeah, exactly. So that was in there as well. So let me get to some of the questions that we have. So how do you determine what level of communication engagement you should provide or commit to when working with stakeholders? I'd say that really depends on the project. Simple answer is to ask them, but I think you need to always be reevaluating at each touch point. I think you can gauge, and that's why actually an in-person communication, which I know gets asked here a lot as well, is helpful, because you gain a lot from that nonverbal communication, and seeing, as they're nodding their heads or looking confused or looking maybe a little annoyed. There's a lot more feedback you can get in person, so making sure that you have some of those touch points, make sure that you have some in person at least engaged or scheduled. I know it's difficult sometimes for those, if you're working with a large company. I know we have a lot of our stakeholders who are remote, but we definitely, we definitely try to, and sometimes I will just travel to go and meet with them so that I can do that. But I definitely think the greater the impacted audience, or the greater the change, the more involvement you need. And then I mentioned before, consider your past projects, and really try to sell that again and saying, hey, this project we had very little, engagement, and it wasn't really very successful. So we really could use a little bit more. Does the level of communication and engagement vary based on the stakeholders' commitment to your project, or is it based on the individual's ability to make final decisions related to your recommendations? And I would say it's both, for sure, but also in how critical their involvement is going to be in helping drive success. So again, we talked a lot about other types of involvements that our stakeholders need to be a part of. So again, we need them heavily involved in driving this. If it's a significant change, if it's, for example, if it's going to potentially impact how people are compensated, that's a big change, even if it's a little thing. So again, I think would consider all of that. What is the most effective method to update the stakeholders on the progress of the project? And again, I think face-to-face conference calls all work great. but again, it's a combination, and again, it depends on what you're communicating and who you're communicating to. But certainly, I would say, again, recommending that making sure that you right-size that communication, and that's something that I have learned in some cases the hard way, especially early on, I will say, for sure. I had a tendency to send emails that were too long, had too much detail, try to talk about and give too many reasonings for things. And I think I addressed it a little bit further, but another question, but I won't do it then. One of the things that I do like to do is whatever that communication is, I like to provide it verbal, I like to have a visual, and I like to keep it higher level and then have details in like an appendix. And again, it depends on who you're talking to, but less is more. It's always more, but with the exception of certain things that you may need to call out. But then I always like to have in my back pocket an appendix that has all of the details, so that if they question something that they want more details on, I can then quickly go to that and pull that out and say, okay, all right, here's the data behind why this was made. Here's why we felt like management skills were critical for a beginning account manager, right? Here's the data that backs that up. But let's start with the data shows that it's important, and then we have that. So how do you engage a stakeholder who has little interest in your project but has the ability to affect change and influence in others in your organization? That's a great question. I wish I really had the answer. These are obviously some of your most critical resistors that you have to get to fast. Again, another real value in having a strong executive sponsor, and I think also having an understanding of the awareness and desire. And it may be that that executive sponsor needs to have that awareness and desire discussion with them. But not engaging them and letting them go out there and hoping that they just catch on, I think depending on their role, can be very dangerous to the project. It certainly can represent a significant risk. No matter how hard we try, mistakes happen. What are some ways to mitigate any havoc that engaging a stakeholder too late? Very timely. Interesting. I didn't put those back to back on purpose. I'd say executive sponsor. I'd say using ADCAR, change management, kind of similar to before. Engaging them, again, one of the best ways, right, is to engage them, ask them what they feel, and, in as much as you can, try to input something that they gave you, right? Bring them in as part of the process, and you will be very quick to get their support if they feel like they are part of it. So, a good question, but I know that's not always, none of that's always possible. Tips to ensure the SME access is guaranteed up front. Again, I think I addressed that early, which is really that alignment meeting. Really is holding that alignment meeting and getting those calendar invites in the calendars right away. So get that project in. Now, one of the difficulties, right, is that sometimes you paint yourself into a corner, and maybe your timeline's going to change, and that's fine if it changes. As soon as you know it changes, change the Outlook invite or calendar invite, whatever you're using. But get on their calendar, get them to accept that. I think also I find helps to get that commitment. When stakeholders have differing, sometimes wildly, I couldn't tell whether it was meant to be widely or wildly, but I don't know that there's too much difference in some cases. Opinions about the goal or implementation of a project, how do you deal with that? And that's tough. I mean, because it happens a lot. I'd say making sure that your analysis engages a lot of different modalities. So you're using different tools that we obviously learned in the program. Extant data can really help. Putting them in the room together, let them fight it out a little bit sometimes helps. But pilot it, right? At the end of the day, take both into consideration, pilot it, get get the learner's feedback, look and see what's applied, would be my recommendation. Do you have a project chart or template? Unfortunately, I don't really have a template. I don't use the same document every time. What I do personally is I will put together a document based on the project, based on the stakeholders, et cetera. Again, one of the things that I showed you was a lead plan that is in a combination of, that's within a combination of documents that I put together. So I kind of build it from a very high level map to validate my understanding of what's being asked, that I do share with, again, my executive stakeholders. And then I will then take that down to further and further and further detail. So that's my process. One thing I do again is I will create a system map, and I will try to map out as much as I can. I love Visio. It's just a technology that I like to use when I'm doing system mapping. And it's more so for myself, just to to be able to whiteboard and make sure I don't forget anybody, and then take that to different stakeholders and make sure that I didn't leave anybody out. So that's what I do. Do you find there are particular stakeholders or categories that are routinely forgotten about? Yes, absolutely, without a doubt. I think that we forget too much. In general, I think especially for myself, working in a corporate environment where we have a strong kind of corporate presence, I don't think we involve our learners enough. I don't think we go out and spend enough time with them. I don't think that we talk to our top performers as well. And I think even more important, I think we forget to talk to our lower performers. That to me, again, we've got to remember to talk to them as well. I think you can learn a lot from them. One of the things I will tell you about kind of learning about that, and I think there's another question I could answer them, but one of the things that I found, and I think it was a question about what would I suggest for somebody starting off, and I think this was a little bit off topic anyway, but one of the things as far as getting to know your learners and getting to know the various stakeholders would be, as an ISD, performance professional, whatever, spend as much time with the folks who are doing the job as you can. Absolute as much time. I will tell you, it was the most uncomfortable time in my entire career was when I went on a client meeting with an account manager. I felt like a complete idiot, but it showed so much to me. And the other thing you might laugh about is my most effective, and I don't know if this is, I guess, especially those who's coming from the school system, it's a little, feels a little awkward to say this, but my most effective conversations that I have had, and where I have gotten the best analysis and gotten to the bottom of the truth and the bottom of reality, has been going out and having drinks with our folks that on office visits. So we would go on office visits, and then we'd go out and have drinks and have dinner. And again, that represents the sales organization and the organization that I'm in. But truth be told, when your learners get a few drinks in them, or your supervisors get a few drinks in them, it's amazing how much you learn. My only caution is don't drink too much yourself. But it may sound strange, it's not in any of the textbooks, but that has been truly the #1 thing that I have, place where I have learned the most. And maybe just say it differently, is in a more social setting as opposed to a more formal setting. So that informal social setting certainly seems to be a really valuable place to gather information. Do you have any best practices for communication with stakeholders throughout a project cycle? Yeah, don't trust that they've read anything that you've sent them. I find, at least with my audience, that after a couple sentences, and I think that's probably the more higher up you get. Now, there are exceptions. There are executives who are just phenomenal detail-oriented people. I find in my experience with a large sales organization, and we're talking about, a lot of them are old former salespeople. So again, understand my audience, is that they've got so much on their plate, they've got so much to do that they're not likely to go past a few sentences. So I think make sure that you're utilizing other modes of communication as well, and that you right-size that communication for the particular time. I am planning on transitioning. Good. So here's our teacher. So transitioning into ISD, what are your biggest challenges you faced in transitioning? Well, that's a great question. I'd say number one was adjusting to my audience. Again, I did training, I did stand-up training, I did teacher training stuff when I was a teacher, but teachers are not salespeople. And what you can get away with a teacher's audience, and what you can get away with some other more corporate-minded audience is very different. And also understanding really what motivates them. Their motivations, I think, were very different. As a teacher, oftentimes we take for granted a little bit that, our students are there, they're learning because they want to learn, or they need to learn because they need to pass the test, and they need to pass the test because they need to pass school, or they want to go to college, or, depending on what you're teaching, or they want to avoid, detention. Well, that was tough. That was a tough transition. I can tell you I designed some activities that were flops. And I definitely learned quick. Engaging supervisors is part of our solution. That took some time, and how to do that, when to do that. Non-training solutions. I'm a huge fan, as you've probably gathered, of including non-training solutions, including job aids, electronics, and actually it was a paper I did as part of my master's program, was electronic support performance systems, and which, of course, I think anyone with the military should be aware of that, and that really did originate in the military. But now that is truly becoming a reality with the technology, and where we've moved, even since I wrote that paper, is just amazing. We're evaluating a tool right now called WalkMe, which you've seen on your phone apps, right? When you first start using an app on your phone, some of them will walk you through how to do things. But it walks you and teaches you while you're actually doing the job, as opposed to saying even in a fake training environment. It literally just walks you through, and you're like, okay, I'm good. But then if I make a mistake, it comes back and says, hey, you want me to show you that again? And then shows you how to do it. Again, it's a paradigm shift, but I think that we're moving in that direction. Not taking people out of production as much as possible. Political hierarchies, and I think you asked another question about that, was my number one probably issue. I could not believe that the person who had the answer was not going to be given the opportunity to give that answer. I was just, the whole hierarchy thing, I would sit there and I'm like, I know the answer to your question. You need to do this. But it wasn't my place to say that. So, and even if I did say it, that idea wasn't going to be taken. So that to me was the most difficult transition, was having to be heard based on status and understanding how to navigate that and get the information to the right people so that we can get to the right solution in the end. And worst transition, though, was not having my summers off, I have to say. So that was the toughest change. How do you navigate through the political landmine? It's all about relationships. It is certainly one that my company stresses a lot, and I think is true across the board, which is it's all about building those relationships, especially if you need their support for projects or questions. Build those relationships ahead of time, develop those relationships, and then when you need them, they will be. You can utilize those. I will tell you, this is a little bit of do as I say, not as I do. Because I will be honest that I am a bit of a bull in a china shop. I think I'm much better than I was 6 years ago, but I always struggle with this. Tough to get the coach out of me. How do you sell your work to the organization? in order to gain project support. And again, this is not in promotional activities. Was not great at this at first. A lot of times it was just really getting the job done and overdoing the job. And again, looking at trying to set up ideas as being their own, which was tough for me. I came in and wanted to prove myself. I wanted to provide the answer all the time. Wanted to show that I was the smartest one there. And what I have found and try to do as much as I can is to try to set up the answer to come from others and guide conversations to there. And Block actually does cover that some in his book as well, and how that is kind of important. In your opinion, what are the key critical skills that program managers need to possess? Relationships, listening and validating what the needs are, getting stakeholders and sponsors engaged, and staying in touch with my audience. So again, for me as a program manager, I'm much more of a manager of content and processes. So it's really critical that I always stay engaged and know not only with the strategy of the company, but also then from the tactical pains that they're experiencing. If you had to choose one book, well, of course that would be Chuck's book, right? And you've heard I really like Flawless Consulting as well. But I do love Chuck's ISD book. I think that it is, I do make the recommendation to a lot of people who want to try to understand what ISD is. What is your process for determining who the right stakeholders are? Again, I think I went through a lot of this. It's really that system analysis, executive sponsor, talking to the executive sponsor. As we build out the implementation and communication plans, why you do that ahead of time is, again, so you can identify who those folks are going to, who they are, and get them engaged as soon as you can. So you don't want to go through this entire project, then go, all right, now it's time to talk about change management. Oops. We should have involved the vice president of the West region. Our bad. You know, too late, right? You make that call. Call them up and say, hey, sorry, we forgot that you were an important person, but we want your support anyway. How do you go about guaranteeing that people you are granted access to are the correct people? Again, question everything, validate with extant data. Get as much, research, reach out to the reporting departments if you can, get information, as much information as you can. I do use a lot the criticality analysis that Chuck covers and talks about. I actually use that a lot, and I have used that and been able to identify some gaps and get added some gaps in saying, hey, you say that this isn't really super important. However, through my analysis, I have discovered that this is a critical skill for success and is used every single day. Oh, yeah, you're right. Now that I think about it, maybe we should include, and specifically this was including management in sales training. We did not talk about management in sales training. Through my criticality analysis, we identified that those who were unsuccessful, that it was mainly because they did not know how to manage their recruiters effectively, and their recruiters were not doing a good job. So we were able to get that added to our sales training. Have you ever engaged the wrong people to advance a project? Absolutely. And then the second part of that question was, how did you get the project back on track? And when we engage the wrong upper-level people, executive sponsor types, or didn't go high enough, we did not get it back on track. And I can think of at least 3 projects, none of it, well, one relatively large, that did not get put back on track. It's not uncommon to replace or add additional SMEs, however. What are some guidelines and suggestions for someone wanting to transition ID from a different unrelated field? And I'd say do it, but get to know your audience. I mentioned that before. listen to everything that your learners have to say with a grain of salt, however. Everyone has a valuable point of view. However, keep in mind that that's just their perspective. So, successful organizations managing new technological integration, and I think I've hit on that a lot. Non-training solutions, electronic performance support systems, on-demand training, just enough, just in time. I showed you an example of how reporting is, and real-time reporting is advancing very, very quickly. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So I think it's helping us a lot. I think it's giving us a lot more opportunities and options, and don't forget mobile, because again, real-time, on-demand access to a mobile, device and being able to see quick training on mobile is, I think, again, it's a paradigm shift, but also a game changer. Speaking of reporting, we say, what types of metrics are you using? And I showed you an example of some of the things that we measure. We really look at a lot of the enabling behaviors to success. In addition, because historically what we've looked at, and I can speak for my organization, historically it's always been spread. So spread means it's how they get paid. We put people to work, we bill our clients a certain amount of money, and we pay the contractors a certain amount of money, and spread is the difference. And that has in the past been everything. Now what we're trying to figure out, what we're realizing is that there's a lot more. There's impact that's not impacting the bottom line immediately, that's impacting us long term. So a lot of the technology and metrics allow us to identify those. Just going to quickly just see if there's any. I think I've pretty much hit on, I'm looking at the rest of these questions, I've pretty much hit on most of what I see, and I know it's getting close to 8:30, and I'm sure you're sick and tired of hearing my voice. I want to open this up to questions, and maybe go ahead and Greg, if you're okay, and maybe just let me know. We can open it up to feeling free to unmute and actually
Sure.
talk.
Yeah, that would be fine.
We'll go ahead and unmute, and anybody who has a question, just go ahead and shoot it out or comments.
Questions, folks?
Hi, this is Sharia. Can you hear me?
Hi, Sharia.
Hi.
Yeah.
I had a question about your first interview when you entered the field of instructional design.
Yeah.
All you had was the job description. How did you prepare for that interview?
That's a good question. One thing that certainly helped me was that put it back on mute. Using your computer.
Okay.
Yeah. Thanks. So one of the things that helped certainly was that one of my classmates was already an ISD there, so that helped. But I approached it and was very honest and literally just asked for a chance. I put together my resume with what I felt were what we would call, kind of more transferable skills, things that I have done, things that I feel like would have transferred to the job itself. But then I was pretty honest in my interview and just said, hey, look, I'm here to learn. I'm here to, but here's what I've done in the past that I think will make me successful and will help me to become successful. So that was pretty much what my approach was. Any other questions? You can unmute and then mute yourself back. Okay. Well, I will take that as no, but definitely feel free if you think of something later. You email that to Greg, or Greg, you can, my email.
Okay.
Feel
Sure.
email me directly. I'm happy to
Okay.
answer any additional questions.
Ciaran, I have a question for you.
Sure.
I talked to a number of people, and one of the things that they tell me that seems to be a theme for me is that people that are, leaving graduate school or making a career change, that once they get into their job, that a lot of them, one of their biggest challenges, and I'm generalizing to make a point, is the challenge with the business-oriented tasks or responsibilities, like writing a proposal, not doing ISD work, but it's like the other stuff that you have to do with your job that you don't necessarily learn in graduate school. And I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Seeing as I turn my expense report in usually a month late still. Certainly that, I think that's a great point. I certainly was fortunate. I've had some really good mentors that helped me with a lot of that. Certainly I think I made some assumptions about the business side that were completely inaccurate. But I would suggest, though, and I do think that that's really important, though, is to ask a lot of questions and to understand the business side. Because at the end of the day, right, I mean, return on your investment and understanding decisions often are made with a lot of financial considerations. For me, that helped me to get over some times where I was frustrated because I was looking at it from a pure learning perspective. But when I started to understand the financial impact, like I had mentioned the whole, Recruiter 2 class about pulling people out of production and meaning that was a loss of money, and then how much do the hotels cost and how much do, those were things that I couldn't have even thought of before I started working there. But I think it helps to understand and find somebody maybe who has grown up through a corporate or a business environment to help mentor. That certainly helps me.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate that. Does anyone have any more questions? Okay, well, I don't hear any questions, so I want to take this opportunity to thank Ciaran for his time, his valuable time. I really appreciate it. We did record the session, so obviously I'll make that available to everyone. Ciaran, I will send you a link to it as well, make it available to you, so you have it for however, it's your intellectual property, so you can use it however you want to use it. And and again, I thank you very much. It was a great topic, and I like the way you approached it.
Oh, well, thank you, Greg. I appreciate it.
All right, folks. Any other questions? We're going to say goodnight to Ciaran. Any questions for me in general? Okay, I'm not hearing anything. So I will see you online. And if you do have questions, please, post them, send me an email, give me a call, and I will see you. Have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.